Marie Peterson didn't know it would be her last day when she walked through the glass doors of Horizon Industries that Friday morning. She'd worn her lucky navy blue blazer, the same one she'd worn to her first interview with the company 20 years ago. Back then, it had been crisp and new, a splurge from her savings that had stretched her budget thin. Now, the fabric at the elbows had worn slightly, but she'd had it tailored twice to keep it fitting perfectly. Much like her career at Horizon, it had evolved with her through the years, becoming more comfortable, more distinctly hers. The security guard, Hector, had greeted her with his usual nod. "Morning, Miss Peterson," he'd said, the way he had nearly every workday for the past 15 years. Marie had smiled back, handing him the extra coffee she brought him on Fridays, their small tradition. Neither of them knew it would be their last exchange. The elevator had carried her to the 14th floor, where she'd built her professional home as HR director. Her team had already been at their desks, diving into the end-of-week rush. Samantha, her assistant for the past 8 years, had looked up with relief when Marie arrived. "Thank God you're here," Samantha had whispered, following Marie into her office. "Richard's been asking for you since 7 this morning. Something about budget proposals and the quarterly reports." Marie had simply nodded, setting down her purse and laptop. Richard Gaines, the new acting CEO, had been with the company for only 6 months. Young, ambitious, and with an MBA from Wharton, he'd been brought in after old Mr. Harrison finally retired. While the board conducted their search for a permanent replacement, Richard had been quick to implement changes, some necessary, others seemingly designed to prove his worth and cement his position. Did he say what he needed specifically? Marie had asked, already pulling up the department's quarterly numbers on her computer. The reports had been excellent. Her team had reduced turnover by 22% and implemented a wellness program that had cut health insurance claims by nearly 15%. 6 months later, Marie sat in her office reviewing the quarterly reports. Horizon Industries had not only recovered from the turbulence of Richard's initial restructuring attempts, but was now thriving under their shared leadership. The leadership development program she had implemented was already showing promising results, with employee engagement scores at an all-time high and turnover rates dropping significantly. Richard knocked on her open door, 2 coffee cups in hand. Their working relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted during those tense early days. He handed her one of the cups, prepared exactly how she liked it. "The board meeting went well," he said, taking a seat across from her desk. "They're particularly impressed with the mentorship initiative you launched." Marie nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. "It's making a difference. When people feel valued, they give their best." "A lesson I learned the hard way," Richard acknowledged with a self-deprecating smile. The past months had softened his edges, teaching him that true leadership required more than just ambitious cost-cutting and restructuring. Later that afternoon, Marie received an email that made her pause. It was from a major competitor, offering her a CEO position, something she had never imagined possible before her transformation at Horizon. She stared at the screen, contemplating this new fork in her path. That evening, as she walked through the office, she passed the cubicle of a young employee who had recently been promoted through her leadership program. The woman smiled up at her with the same admiration Marie had once felt for her own mentors. In that moment, Marie knew her answer. Her journey wasn't about titles or power, it was about impact. Whether she stayed at Horizon or eventually pursued new challenges, she had discovered her true value, and no one could ever take that away from her again. As she drove home that night, Marie reflected on how sometimes our greatest setbacks lead to our most meaningful comebacks. Her story wasn't just about professional redemption, It was about the power of maintaining your integrity even when others don't maintain theirs. If you found this story inspiring, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setbacks can become the foundation for something even greater. Comment below with a time when you turned a professional challenge into an opportunity. Remember, sometimes the darkest moments in our careers are just setting the stage for our greatest triumphs. She'd been proud of those numbers, certain they would impress even Richard. Just that he needs to see you before the board meeting at 4, Samantha had replied, handing her a stack of employee files that needed reviewing. The day had progressed like any other. Marie had approved 2 new hires, mediated a dispute between the marketing and sales departments, and finalized the new parental leave policy she'd been championing for months. At 52, she'd built not just a career but a legacy at Horizon. She knew the names of nearly all 300 employees, had attended their weddings, sent flowers when their children were born, and written more reference letters than she could count. Marie had been reviewing applications for the summer internship program when her desk phone rang at 3:15. "Miss Peterson, Mr. Gaines would like to see you in his office," Richard's new assistant had said. Young, with a voice that still carried the tentative tone of someone not entirely comfortable with authority. "Of course, I'll be right there," Marie had replied, saving her work and gathering the quarterly reports she assumed he wanted to discuss before the board meeting. Richard's office had once belonged to Mr. Harrison, but where the previous CEO had filled the space with family photos, industry awards, and well-worn books, Richard had transformed it into a sleek, minimalist space. The walnut desk remained, but now it held only a laptop, a single notepad, and a designer pen that probably cost more than Marie's monthly car payment. "Come in, Marie," Richard had said without looking up from his computer screen. At 36, he was 16 years her junior, with the polished appearance of someone who spent as much time at high-end gyms as he did in the office. "Please close the door." She had settled into the chair across from him, placing the reports on his desk. "I've brought the quarterly numbers you asked for. We've made significant progress in—" "That won't be necessary," Richard had interrupted, finally looking up. His expression had been carefully neutral, but something in his eyes had made Marie's stomach tighten with a familiar dread she hadn't felt since her divorce 12 years earlier. It was the look of someone who had already emotionally disconnected from a conversation that was about to change everything. "Marie, we're implementing some structural changes at Horizon," he had said, his voice carrying the rehearsed quality of someone who had practiced this speech. "As part of our new direction, we're streamlining the executive team and redistributing responsibilities across departments." Marie had felt her mouth go dry. "I see. And what does that mean for HR?" "We're consolidating HR functions under operations. Your position as HR director has been eliminated, effective immediately." He had delivered the news with all the emotion of someone reading a weather report. 20 years of loyalty, dismissed in 2 minutes. Marie had stared at him, momentarily unable to process what she was hearing. Effective immediately, she'd finally managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. "Richard, I've been with this company for 20 years. I've built the entire human resources infrastructure. Your contributions have been noted," he'd replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "This contains information about your severance package, which is generous given your tenure. 2-month salary, continuation of benefits through the end of the quarter, and outplacement services." Marie had not reached for the folder. The board approved this? A flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps even guilt, had crossed Richard's face before he regained his composure. "The board has given me authority to implement structural changes as needed. This decision falls within those parameters." "I see. The words had felt hollow in her mouth. "Security will accompany you to clear out your desk," Richard had continued, already looking back at his computer screen. "For data protection reasons, you understand." And that had been it. 20 years reduced to a cardboard box of personal items, carried out under the watchful eye of the same security guard who had greeted her with coffee that morning. Samantha had cried, whispering promises to call over the weekend. The team had looked on in shocked silence as Marie walked through the department for the final time. The weekend had passed in a blur of ice cream, wine, and tears. By Monday morning, Marie hadn't showered in 3 days. Her daughter, Emma, a junior at Northwestern, had called repeatedly, but Marie had only texted back brief assurances that she was fine, not wanting her daughter to worry during finals week. Her phone was filled with sympathetic messages from colleagues she couldn't bear to answer. At 52, with a mortgage still weighing heavily on her finances and Emma's tuition payments looming, panic had begun to set in beneath the numbness. Marie had spent Monday morning in her pajamas, half-heartedly scrolling through job listings on her laptop. Each position she found either required relocating, impossible with Emma still depending on their home base, or offered significantly less than what she'd been making. 20 years of experience, and suddenly she felt as valuable as a fresh graduate. The doorbell had rung just past noon, startling her out of her spiral of increasingly desperate thoughts. Wiping her eyes and trying to smooth her unwashed hair, Marie had opened the door to find Edward from Company Mail Services looking uncomfortable on her porch, shifting from one foot to another. "Sorry to bother you at home, Miss Peterson," he'd said, unable to quite meet her eyes. "There's an urgent document they need your signature on." He'd handed her a manila envelope with the Horizon logo. Apparently, it got overlooked during everything. Marie took the envelope wordlessly and closed the door without inviting Edward in, not wanting him to see the state of her living room. Wine glasses from the weekend still scattered on the coffee table, throw blankets tangled on the couch, where she'd spent most of the past 3 nights drifting between fitful sleep and tearful ruminations. For a moment, she simply stood in her entryway, staring at the company logo embossed on the envelope. The familiar horizon line with 3 ascending peaks had once filled her with pride. Now it just reopened the wound of rejection that was still so fresh. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope. Inside was an executive promotion approval form, the standard HR document she herself had designed years ago to ensure proper documentation of leadership changes. It was for Richard Gaines, formalizing his transition from acting CEO to permanent chief executive officer of Horizon Industries. And there, at the bottom, was a blank line awaiting her signature as head of HR, the final authorization needed according to company protocol. Marie laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and foreign in her quiet house. Richard's promotion wasn't even official yet. The man who had fired her after 20 years of devoted service needed her signature to cement his position at the company she had helped build. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, crumpling the paper in her fist and throwing it across the room where it bounced off the wall and landed near a half-empty container of ice cream. For the next 2 hours, Marie paced her living room, alternating between rage and tears. She drafted scathing emails to the board that she didn't send, imagining herself marching into their meeting room to expose Richard's lack of experience and his callous dismantling of departments that had made Horizon successful for decades. She pictured the satisfaction of hearing that Richard's promotion had been denied because the proper documentation she had been responsible for, wasn't complete. Eventually, her restless pacing brought her to the crumpled form. She picked it up and smoothed it out against her kitchen counter, studying it as though it might reveal some hidden message. She could simply ignore it, Or she could write across it in bold red letters, "Denied by the person you fired after 20 years." The thought brought a fleeting smile to her face. "I could make his life hell," she whispered to herself, tapping her fingers against the counter. But as the initial rush of vindictive pleasure faded, Marie found herself thinking about what would come next for her. She would need references to secure another position. The industry in her city was close-knit, and word traveled fast. And more than practical considerations, there was something else, a quiet voice reminding her that 20 years of integrity shouldn't be abandoned in a moment of justified anger. She thought about her daughter, Emma, who had watched her mother navigate the painful divorce from her father with grace, never speaking ill of him despite his betrayal. She thought about the countless times she had counseled employees at Horizon to take the high road during conflicts. "Your reputation is built over years," she would tell them, "but can be damaged in minutes." Marie picked up a pen from the counter and sat down at her kitchen table. She signed the form with her usual fluid signature, but then added a note beneath it. "Consider this my last official act at Horizon. 20 years deserved better than 2 minutes." She slipped the form back into its envelope, sealed it, and texted Edward to collect it from her mailbox. Then she poured another glass of wine, but this time not to numb the pain. This time, it felt like closing a chapter, acknowledging the end of something significant before moving forward. The next morning, Marie showered for the first time since Friday, washing away the residue of shock and self-pity along with the shampoo suds. She dressed in her second favorite blazer, a charcoal gray one that had always made her feel competent and professional, and began making calls to her network. By the end of the day, she had 3 informational interviews scheduled and a lunch meeting with a former colleague who had started his own consulting firm. Days turned into weeks. Marie established a routine. Mornings for job applications and networking, afternoons for brushing up on industry certifications and skills, evenings for taking care of herself, cooking proper meals, going for walks in her neighborhood, reconnecting with friends she'd neglected during her all-consuming career at Horizon. She started a blog about workplace culture and leadership, channeling her expertise and experience into something that felt productive and forward-looking rather than dwelling on the past. Emma had come home for a weekend, concerned about her mother despite Marie's assurances. They'd spent Saturday baking together, an activity they had both loved when Emma was younger, but had abandoned as their lives grew busier. As they kneaded dough for cinnamon rolls, Marie found herself telling her daughter the full story of her dismissal and the promotion form. "You signed it?" Emma had asked, flour dusting her cheeks. "After what he did to you?" Marie had nodded, working the dough with slightly more force than necessary. "I did."
"Why?"
"I would have told him exactly where to stick that form." Emma's indignation on her behalf had warmed Marie's heart. "Because I spent 20 years building a reputation for integrity and professionalism," Marie had replied after a thoughtful pause. "And I wasn't going to let one bad day or one arrogant man change who I am." Emma had studied her mother's face for a long moment before her expression softened. "You're pretty amazing, Mom. I hope I have half your strength when I'm your age." 3 weeks after her termination, Marie was sitting in the reception area of Westlake Partners, waiting for her interview for a senior HR consultant position. The company had an excellent reputation, and the role would allow her to work with multiple clients, sharing the expertise she'd developed over decades. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Samantha. "Board meeting chaos. Richard's reorganization plan rejected. Your termination being reviewed." Marie stared at the message, her heart suddenly racing. Before she could respond, her phone rang with an unknown number. Excusing herself to the receptionist, she stepped outside to take the call. "Marie Peterson speaking," she answered, her voice carefully neutral despite the turmoil of emotions the text had stirred up. "Marie, it's Richard Gaines." His voice sounded different, subdued, perhaps even humbled. She said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "The board saw your note," he said quietly after a few seconds of awkward silence. "And they've been looking at the numbers from your department over the past few years. I made a mistake. I wanted to prove myself by cutting costs, and I targeted the wrong person. The wrong department." Marie watched a pair of sparrows hopping around on the sidewalk, fighting over a piece of discarded bread. "I'm listening," she said, surprised at her own calm. "Turnover has increased by 30% in just these few weeks. 2 managers have already resigned, citing concerns about company direction. The wellness program implementation has stalled completely." He paused, and she could hear him taking a deep breath. "They want you back, Marie. And honestly, I need to learn from someone who understands this company." His voice cracked slightly. "Someone who had every reason to sabotage me, but didn't." Marie stood perfectly still outside the Westlake Partners building, watching business people stream past her on the busy downtown sidewalk. The spring sun warmed her face, a stark contrast to the cold shock of Richard's words reverberating in her mind. 20 feet away, through the glass doors, her potential new future waited in the form of an interview. On the phone, her past called for her return. "Marie?" Richard prompted after her prolonged silence. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," she replied, her voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions beneath the surface. "I'm just processing what you're saying." "I understand," he said, and for the first time since she'd met him, Richard Gaines sounded genuinely humble. "Take whatever time you need. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They want to discuss reinstating your position." Marie thought for a long moment, watching a young woman hurry past, juggling a cardboard tray of coffee cups, presumably for her office colleagues. How many times had Marie been that woman, rushing to make everyone else's workplace function smoothly? "Richard, I have an interview in 5 minutes, she finally said. "I need to go. But let me be clear about something. I'm not interested in coming back to the same position I left." "What do you? If the board wants to speak with me, I'll meet with them next week." But understa. Back into the Westlake Partners building with her head held high and a new sense of purpose in her stride. The interview went exceptionally well. Marie spoke candidly about her abrupt departure from Horizon, framing it as a learning experience rather than a setback. "Sometimes our greatest growth comes from our most painful transitions," she told the interviewer, believing it more fully with each passing day. That evening, sitting on her back porch with a glass of iced tea instead of wine, Marie called Emma to update her on the day's developments. "Mom, that's incredible," Emma exclaimed after hearing about Richard's call. "Are you going to go back?" Marie watched a hummingbird dart around her flowering shrubs, its wings moving too quickly to see clearly, yet somehow keeping the tiny creature perfectly balanced. "I'm not sure yet. The board wants to meet next week." "But you said you wouldn't go back to your old position," Emma noted. "What are you thinking?" Marie smiled, a plan forming in her mind that had been germinating since Richard's call. When life gives you leverage, honey, you use it. The following week, Marie walked through the glass doors of Horizon Industries for the first time since her unceremonious exit. She'd worn her red blazer this time, the one she reserved for negotiations and power meetings. Hector, the security guard, beamed when he saw her. "Ms. Peterson." "The rumors were true," he said, reaching for her ID badge before remembering she wouldn't have one. "Sorry, I'll need to sign you in as a visitor." "That's all right, Hector," she replied warmly. "How's your son's baseball team doing this season?" His face lit up at her remembering the detail. championship game this Saturday. His pitching has really improved. This simple exchange reinforced what Marie already knew. Her value at Horizon went far beyond spreadsheets and protocols. She had built relationships, shown genuine care for people's lives, remembered birthdays and children's names, and personal milestones. These were things Richard's algorithms and efficiency models couldn't measure. The board meeting room felt smaller than she remembered, or perhaps it was that she felt larger somehow, more certain of her worth, less willing to shrink herself to make others comfortable. The 7 board members were already seated when she arrived, with Richard at the far end looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Marie, thank you for coming," said Eleanor Winters, the board chairwoman and one of the few people who had been with Horizon even longer than Marie. "We've had some time to review recent events, and we believe there's been a significant error in judgment regarding your position." Marie nodded but said nothing, taking the empty seat across from Richard. "Your department's metrics over the past 5 years have been exemplary," continued Gregory Portman, another board member. "Cost-efficient yet maintaining high employee satisfaction. The programs you've implemented have reduced our insurance premiums by nearly 20% while decreasing turnover." "And then there's this," Eleanor added, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Marie recognized it immediately, her signed approval of Richard's promotion, complete with her pointed note about 20 years deserving better than 2 minutes. "This showed us something about your character, Marie. Something we value tremendously at Horizon." Richard cleared his throat. "I made a serious misjudgment," he admitted, looking directly at Marie for the first time. "In my eagerness to prove my worth as CEO, I made cuts that appeared logical on paper but failed to account for the intangible value certain roles bring to the company." Marie allowed the silence to stretch for a moment before responding. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," she said finally. "But as I mentioned to Richard on the phone, I'm not interested in returning to my previous position." A ripple of surprise went through the room. "What would it take to bring you back to Horizon?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. Marie had come prepared. She opened her portfolio and removed a document she had spent the weekend drafting. "I'm proposing a new position, Chief People Officer, with a seat on the executive board." She slid copies to each person at the table. This role would oversee not just traditional HR functions, but also corporate culture initiatives, leadership development, and strategic workforce planning. It would report directly to the board rather than to the CEO, ensuring people considerations are given equal weight in business decisions. The board members flipped through her proposal, exchanging glances. "This would be a significant restructuring," Richard noted, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes," Marie agreed simply. "It would." "And your compensation requirements?" Gregory asked, already turning to the relevant page in her proposal. "Are outlined on page 4, along with performance metrics by which I suggest the role be evaluated." Eleanor smiled slightly, looking at Marie with new respect. "You've put considerable thought into this." "I've had 3 weeks to consider what went wrong here," Marie replied evenly. "And how to fix it." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, diving into the details of Marie's proposal. What had begun as a meeting about reinstating her turned into a robust conversation about the company's structure, values, and future direction. Throughout it all, Marie remained composed and confident, deflecting suggestions to water down the authority of the role or compromise on the compensation package. "We'll need to discuss this among ourselves," Eleanor finally said, gathering her notes. "But speaking personally, I think you've made a compelling case, Marie." As the meeting concluded and Marie prepared to leave, Richard approached her. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" he asked, his usual confidence noticeably absent. They stepped into an empty conference room adjacent to the boardroom. Richard closed the door and turned to face her. "I underestimated you," he said simply. Marie raised an eyebrow. "Yes, you did. I want you to know that regardless of what the board decides, I've learned a valuable lesson from this situation. About leadership. About valuing people beyond their immediate measurable output." Marie studied him carefully, looking for signs of insincerity, but finding none. "That's a good lesson to learn early in your career, Richard. There's something else," he continued, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "If you do come back as Chief People Officer, we'll be colleagues. I need to know if you can work with me after what happened." The question was fair. Marie took a moment to consider it honestly. "I don't work based on grudges," she finally said. "I sign my name to something, I stand by it, whether that's an HR policy, a promotion approval, or a working relationship." Relief visibly washed over his face. "Thank you." As Marie left the building, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The anger and humiliation that had consumed her after her termination had transformed into something unexpected, a catalyst for growth and change. Whether the board accepted her proposal or not, she had reclaimed her sense of agency and worth. 2 days later, Eleanor called with their decision. They had accepted her proposal in full, with only minor amendments to the implementation timeline. Marie would become Horizon Industries' first Chief People Officer, with a seat on the executive board and a compensation package that exceeded even her ambitious request. "When can you start?" Eleanor asked. Marie glanced at the offer letter from Westlake Partners that had arrived that morning. The position was good, the company solid. But it wasn't Horizon, the place where she had spent half her life, where she knew every corner of the building and most of the employees by name. "Monday," she replied. "But I have one additional condition." "Which is?" "Samantha gets promoted to HR director, reporting to me. She's more than ready, and she deserves the opportunity." Eleanor chuckled. "Already making executive decisions. I think we've created a monster."
No, Marie corrected gently.
"You've recognized one that was always there." The news of Marie's return to Horizon Industries spread through the company like wildfire, not as the reinstated HR director, but as the newly appointed Chief People Officer with a seat on the executive board. Employees who had been disheartened by her sudden dismissal found renewed hope in the unprecedented turnaround. If Marie Peterson could be fired after 20 years only to come back stronger than ever, perhaps there was justice in the corporate world after all. Her first day back, Marie arrived early, deliberately choosing to enter through the main lobby rather than the executive entrance she was now entitled to use. She wanted to see the faces, greet the people who made up the living organism that was Horizon. Hector was at his usual post, and his face broke into a wide grin when he saw her approach. "Ms. Peterson. Or should I say, Chief Peterson now," he teased, handing her a brand new security badge with her updated title. "Just Marie is still fine, Hector," she replied warmly. "How was the championship game?" "They won," he beamed, pulling out his phone to show her photos of his son holding a trophy almost as big as his torso. Bobby pitched the final 3 innings without allowing a single run. Marie took a moment to look through the photos, asking questions and sharing in his pride. This was what had been missing in Richard's data-driven approach to leadership, the recognition that a company wasn't just departments and functions and profit margins. It was people with lives and dreams and small, everyday victories that mattered to them. When she finally made her way to her new office, significantly larger than her previous one and located on the executive floor, she found it already filled with flowers and welcome-back cards from employees throughout the company. Samantha stood in the center of the room, orchestrating the arrangement of furniture and technology setup, her face lighting up when Marie entered. "Boss!" she exclaimed, hurrying over to envelop Marie in a tight hug. "Or should I be calling you something more formal now that you're my boss's boss?" Marie laughed, returning the embrace. "Please, never change how you address me," she said, meaning it. "And congratulations on your promotion. No one deserves it more." Samantha's eyes glistened with tears. "I still can't believe any of this. When they escorted you out that day, I thought, well, I started updating my resume that same night." "As you should have," Marie acknowledged, setting her purse down on her new desk. "Never let loyalty override your professional self-interest completely," says the woman who came back to the company that fired her, Samantha noted with a sly smile. "I came back on my terms," Marie corrected her. "There's a world of difference." The morning flew by in a flurry of meetings and reintroductions. Though she'd only been gone for 3 weeks, Marie was acutely aware of the shift in how people perceived her. There was a new respect in their eyes, sometimes even a touch of awe. She had become something of a legend overnight, the executive who had been unfairly dismissed, only to return with greater power and influence than before. Shortly before lunch, Richard knocked on her office door. He looked different somehow, the polish and confidence he usually projected tempered by something that might have been humility. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, hovering in the doorway. Marie gestured to one of the chairs across from her desk. "Of course." He sat down, fidgeting slightly with his tie. "I wanted to check in. See how your first day back is going." "It's going well," she replied, studying him with newfound curiosity. In their previous interactions, she had always been the subordinate, always conscious of the power dynamic between them. Now, as equals on the executive team, she saw him differently, younger, less certain than he portrayed himself to be, perhaps even somewhat lost in the role he'd fought so hard to secure. "We have the executive committee meeting tomorrow," he continued. "I thought maybe we could align on a few key points beforehand." Marie nodded slowly, recognizing the olive branch he was extending. "That would be helpful. Why don't we have lunch in the boardroom and discuss it?" As they walked together to the boardroom, Marie noticed the curious glances from employees they passed. The narrative was irresistible. The fired HR director and the CEO who had dismissed her, now walking side by side as peers. She could almost hear the whispered conversations that would follow in their wake. Over lunch, they discussed the upcoming meeting agenda, but the conversation gradually shifted to broader topics about the company's direction and culture. "The thing is," Richard admitted after they had moved past initial awkwardness, "I was brought in to modernize Horizon, to make it more competitive in the digital landscape. The board made it clear they wanted fresh perspectives, bold moves. And firing the HR director with 20 years of institutional knowledge seemed like a bold move." Marie couldn't resist asking, though she kept her tone light. Richard winced. "When you put it that way, it sounds absurd. But in the abstract, streamlining leadership, reducing overhead in non-revenue generating departments, it fit the mandate I thought I had." Marie considered this. "That's the danger of abstraction in leadership, Richard. People become lines on a spreadsheet. Experience becomes an expense rather than an asset. 20 years of relationship building gets reduced to a salary figure that can be eliminated to improve quarterly numbers." He nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to see that. But how do you balance it?" "The business does need to evolve, to become more efficient. By remembering that efficiency isn't just about cutting costs. It's about maximizing value. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the hardest to quantify: institutional knowledge, trusted relationships with clients and employees, cultural cohesion." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. That's part of what my role as Chief People Officer is designed to protect and develop. Their conversation continued as they finished lunch, finding unexpected common ground in their visions for Horizon's future, albeit from different perspectives. By the time they returned to their respective offices, something had shifted between them. Not friendship, exactly, but a mutual respect that might eventually grow into a productive partnership. The remainder of Marie's first week passed in a whirlwind of activity. She met with each department head individually, reestablishing connections and gathering insights about changes that had occurred during her absence. She outlined her vision for her new role to the entire company in a town hall meeting that received a standing ovation. And she began drafting plans for new initiatives that would have been impossible from her previous position, but now, with board-level authority, became viable paths forward. By Friday afternoon, exhaustion had begun to set in. The emotional roller coaster of the past month, from devastating termination to triumphant return, had taken a toll that even her newfound success couldn't completely erase. When Emma called as Marie was preparing to leave for the day, her daughter's voice was a welcome respite. "So, how was the first week as Chief People Whatever?" Emma asked, her tone teasing but proud. Marie laughed, leaning back in her chair and kicking off her heels. "Chief People Officer. And it was intense." "Good, but intense." "Better than your old job?" "Different," Marie replied after considering the question. "More strategic, less day-to-day operations. I'm in more high-level meetings, fewer employee disputes." "Do you miss the hands-on stuff?" Marie thought about this. "Some of it. But Samantha is handling that beautifully in her new role. And I'm still connected to the people, just in a different way now." "And what about that guy? The one who fired you? Is it super awkward?" "Richard?" Marie smiled slightly. "It was at first, but we're finding a way to work together. He's not a bad person, Emma. Just inexperienced in some ways that matter." "You're too forgiving," Emma declared, the absolutism of youth evident in her tone. "If someone treated me that way, I'd never let them forget it." "That's not forgiveness," Marie corrected gently. "It's pragmatism. Holding on to resentment only hurts the person doing the holding. And besides, there's something instructive about working alongside the person who once undervalued you." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I think I get it," she finally said. "It's like every day you show up, you're proving him wrong all over again." Marie laughed. "I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but yes, I suppose there is some satisfaction in that." After they hung up, Marie sat quietly in her office, looking out at the city skyline as the setting sun cast long shadows across the urban landscape. 3 weeks ago, she had left this building in tears, her career seemingly in shambles. Now she sat in an executive office, with greater authority and compensation than she had ever imagined for herself. The journey from that moment to this one had been painful, humiliating, and at times seemingly hopeless. Yet something profound had emerged from that darkness, a stronger, more certain version of herself who no longer defined her worth by a title or a company's validation. As Marie gathered her things to leave for the weekend, her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Board approved your leadership development proposal. Full funding. Congratulations." She smiled, typing back a simple "thank you" before slipping the phone into her purse. The proposal had been ambitious, a comprehensive program to identify and nurture talent throughout the company, with special emphasis on overlooked employees with high potential. Walking through the now quiet office, Marie paused at Samantha's desk, where a family photo had been newly placed. Samantha, her husband, and their 2 teenagers, all smiling brightly at a recent beach vacation. The sight warmed Marie's heart. This was why the work mattered, not for profit margins or efficiency metrics, but for the real lives impacted by workplace decisions. As she pressed the button for the elevator, Marie reflected on the note she had written on Richard's promotion form. 20 years deserved better than 2 minutes. At the time, it had been a rebuke, a final expression of hurt and disappointment. Now it seemed like a prophecy fulfilled. She had indeed deserved better, and against all odds, she had received it. Not as a gift bestowed by others, but as an outcome she had helped create through her own actions and choices. The elevator doors opened, and Marie stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors closed and the elevator began its descent, she caught her reflection in the polished metal wall. There was a newfound confidence in her posture, a quiet strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The elevator reached the lobby, and as Marie crossed toward the exit, Hector called out to her. "Have a good weekend, Chief Peterson." "You too, Hector."
Good luck at Bob.
These doors in tears just weeks ago. The pain of betrayal had transformed into something powerful, a catalyst for growth and change not just for herself, but for the entire company. As she drove home, Marie reflected on life's unexpected twists. Being fired had forced her to confront her own worth beyond her job title. In those dark days of uncertainty, she had discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. That night, Marie opened a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for a special occasion. Sitting on her back porch under the stars, she toasted herself, not for the impressive new title or the corner office, but for the woman she had become through adversity. Sometimes the strongest response to injustice isn't revenge, but refusing to let it change who you are at your core. Marie had signed that form not out of weakness, but out of integrity. And that integrity had ultimately been her greatest power.